Good morning, everyone. It's Bree here at Blossoming Branch, and it is 6 a.m. bright and early here at the farm, and we're getting ready to do a busy day at work. I thought I'd just bring you along today, so let's go. All right, first stop is the lavender field. So we had the sheep eat this down, so it's nice and short now, but they don't do the best job, especially with the edges. And so just to keep our neighbors happy, I'm gonna run the mower over this real quick. Meanwhile, we've got Dawn down there helping me out. So during the season, I have 2 part-time helpers, so usually totaling about 8 hours a week of help during the full season. And so Dawn is down there helping get some grass out of the lavender. I'm just gonna hook up my attachment to my mower and capture all this grass into here so that I can feed it to the sheep. So if you're feeding livestock with fresh grass, you have to feed it immediately after you cut it, because as it gets chopped up, it just creates a lot of moisture and then it can start to ferment mold and stuff, so you don't want to feed that to livestock. But fresh cut is good. Or you can cut it and then dry it out. But don't cut it and let it sit moist and then feed it to them. Make sense? Yeah, like you don't have my back at all.
Yes, I was like, I'm not gonna say one of them replied to my email.
They didn't even reply?
No, nothing. Didn't say anything in person, didn't reply to the email. So then when I wrote, right, what is it?
All our peonies are close to harvesting. These ones are more behind, but these ones over here are ready to harvest. So we usually harvest them at about this stage where they're slightly squishy to the touch, not firm. So this is too early here, but just a little squishy, showing their color, and then that way we can store them in the cooler for up to 8 weeks. And then once we cut them and put them in water and bring them out into the warmer air, they bloom. So that helps us extend our peony season. So you can see here we have our earliest bloomers on this side, and then mid and late bloomers. So that way it staggers out our peony harvest a little bit, so they're not all blooming at the same time. But peony harvest is my favorite time. Down here we've got our grasses coming in. So we switched over to a native grass walkway. We seeded this 2 falls ago, so not last fall, but the fall before. So we've got blue grama in these walkways. We also have a little buffalo grass, which I'm not sure yet how that's going to do. Buffalo grass kind of spreads and creeps using stolons like these, kind of like similar to Bermuda grass. So I'm actually going to let this kind of creep and hopefully fill in around the peonies and yet not compete with them. We'll see how that works out. I'm not recommending it yet, but I do love the blue grama because the blue grama just clumps. It doesn't necessarily spread like the buffalo grass does. And it's nice and soft to walk on. If you remember, we actually overwinter these peonies. So what you see here is these huge piles of mulch all in the walkways because we cleared the mulch to the side. And now we need to move this. So we're going to redistribute all this mulch to the rest of our planting areas today. But these actually got hit with a frost. And so you can see the tips are kind of dying back. So this is always a concern that I have with overwintered dahlias, is they tend to come up a little bit early. And you can see that's what happened with these ones, but they'll be fine. It just kind of frost killed the tips, but they'll start regrowing. It kind of served as a little bit of a pinch for them. So we're going to remove all this mulch today and shuffle it around to the other walkways for our weed prevention, since we don't use the weed fabric anymore. Just organic matter mulch. This stuff is awesome though. Look at that majestic mulch shot. It's beautiful. All right, I'm getting ready to plant our tomatoes. So it's now almost June. We're finally past the threat of last frost, and I'm glad I didn't do this earlier because, like I said, our dahlias got frost killed just a couple days ago. So really until almost June, it's too cold here, and also the soil temperatures are too cold. So even though the air temperatures are warm, and they have been warm here for a few weeks, The soil temperatures are what I'm always concerned about, which are usually about 10 degrees behind whatever the air temperature is. So it's just now getting to around 60, which is where I like to plant my tomato plants. The temperature in the soil that I like to plant at, because colder than that, you can run into some issues. I've found personally, I think that's where a lot of tomato issues like blight and blossom end rot come from, are planting too early into cold soil. So anyway, we are just getting the soil ready to go here. I've got my twine. I do like to trellis my tomatoes, and so I've got my support posts here, and I'm going to tie some twine to them, and then I'm going to get planting. The soil here is different than the rest of the soil at the farm. We have two types of soil here, and for the most part we treat them both the same because all the practices really apply to both. So we've got sandy soil here, and then more in the field we have the really heavy red clay. So this one, I happen to know, is not high in phosphorus like the rest of our soil. We have a lot of high phosphorus in the soil over here in the field. This soil tends to be high in phosphorus, so I don't like to add a lot of compost. This soil is not, so here I am going to add some compost into these planting holes as I get these tomatoes in the ground. But first, let's get the trellises up. It's an exciting day when I get to stop babying tomatoes, you know, when you finally get things in the ground and you don't have to worry about them as much. We're going to be planting these ones from our trays that had the wool in the bottom. These tomatoes have grown so fast. They've only been in these trays for 6 weeks, but they are insanely large. All right, here are the out of control tomato jungle forest here in the wood trays. So these were the trays. We started with the wool in the bottom, and these were treated with that shosugi bone, so charred and then oiled. And these are doing quite well. Definitely ready to plant. I'm gonna have some work to do separating these, so let's go figure out how we're gonna do that. All right, I've got my zinnia seeds here today as well. So because we're past last frost and our soil is warm, we're gonna get good germination on our zinnia seeds now. I just sow mine into a furrow. So I just draw a little furrow out with my hand, and then I just pop them right into the soil. I do a tighter spacing than is probably recommended. I typically do my furrows about 6 inches apart. I just do them right along next to my drip lines, and then I sow my seeds right in. And I do, again, I kind of heavily seed my zinnias just because they tend to get eaten, and that way, even if some get eaten, it's not going to be a big deal. Some will still grow. I'm also sowing my very expensive floret zinnias, so this is terrifying. If you also are growing these floret zinnias that were like $10, $15 a packet, you are also probably terrified. So cross our fingers, let's seed these. On the just a little cover, and we just say a prayer to the zinnia gods. Please let my zinnias come up. All right, once I get the rest of this row seeded, I'll show you my trick to help keep birds from getting to these seedlings, and also bunnies, especially as they're starting to come up. But let me get the rest of this row seeded first. All right, I finally have this whole row seeded, and so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some burlap down. So you could also use frost fabric or muslin. You want a lightweight fabric that's still going to allow light through, but it's going to help with moisture retention. It's also going to help keep bunnies and birds from eating my seedlings. And so in this case I'm using burlap, which you can see allows light through, but it's going to help retain moisture. It's going to help give a little bit of protection, but it's not too heavy that it's going to block out light, or that, you know, there's going to be a lot of slugs underneath. So I'm going to go ahead and roll this out and stake it down, and then I leave this in place until the seedlings are maybe have their second set of true leaves. You really can leave it on longer than you think. It's going to help keep the moisture in. It's going to help keep them protected from anything that's going to nibble them, and they'll keep growing right up and under it because there's light coming through this fabric. So let's get it rolled up. Okay, well, it's now the end of the day. I did not get my tomatoes in earlier because it was just frankly too hot. And because I haven't used the wood seed trays that often yet, I was a little bit worried about whether they were going to have some transplant shock because I am cutting them apart. So that being said, I waited until dusk. Now, dusk can be a really nice time to plant, not only because it's lovely, it's cooler, the birds are chirping, it's just a very nice time of day, but also because our plants are less likely to experience transplant shock if they're planted in the cool, dark, dusky hours and then let acclimate overnight versus planting in the heat of the day. So I try to avoid planting in the heat of the day whenever possible, both for myself and for my seedlings. But now that it's dusk, we're gonna go ahead and plant them in. What I'm doing is I am cutting them up. I'm actually just using my little Japanese hoe, but you could use a knife if you are trying these wood trays this year like I am. And actually, I'm really happy with how these seedlings look. You know, considering how big they are in these containers, I really like to plant them out before they get this big, but they are just so happy considering how large they are and how little soil there is in here. So I'm gonna just quickly show you how I'm cutting these. So here I've got this is just my Japanese hoe, and I love this tool. I love this tool, by the way. It is so great for weeding and just like that. It's a nice one. Anyway, but so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna cut around the tomato, just like I'm cutting a cake. And then I'm just gonna lift it out. And you can see, like, my goodness, look at this tomato. I mean, this thing is huge. Especially compared to how much soil it's in. I mean, really, now near the bottom we do have a little bit of yellowing, and that's just because these are beyond ready to be planted out. And down here in the roots, you can see where the wool was and how the roots have kind of grown right into that, but actually there's not much wool left considering how much I put in the bottom of these. So it has definitely been using that wool as a resource. So this is the only soil that we've got here, and again, this is the size of the plant. Very, very nice and happy and healthy. What I'm gonna move my mulch aside. You know how I feel about mulch. I love using the wood chips on the surface of the soil, but I try not to mix them into the soil itself. So that means I'm moving it aside before I plant so that I don't accidentally mix them in. And I'm just gonna go ahead and dig this up with my hands. This soil that's been sitting under these wood chips is so happy and healthy. I'm just going to dig it up with my hands. I don't even need to use a shovel. And I know a lot of people plant their tomatoes sideways. Totally agree with that method. I think it's a great method. I'm gonna do it a little bit today, but not like a really deep sideways, just a little bit. So I've got my little hole dug. I'm gonna throw some compost in there. This is really only partially decomposed. I actually mixed some finished compost like you see here, and I mixed that with a little bit of sheep manure. So we're just gonna go ahead and pop that in. So this is aged sheep manure, but it's not exactly composted. You can see there's still some straw bits in there and stuff, but that's okay. Here we go. Pop a handful of that in there. That is a beautiful sight, this soil in here. And no, our soil did not start out like this. If you want to learn more about our soil methods, we have a whole video on how we do that over on our how to transform soil video. But for now, I'm just gonna go ahead and plant this in. So I mentioned that it's up to you whether you prune suckers. Now, any of these suckers that are gonna be kind of below the soil level, those ones I'll definitely pull off. So I'll remove those kind of lower suckers there like that. So I didn't remove too terribly much, but just a little bit. And now we're gonna go ahead and pop this in. And like I mentioned, a slight sideways. I always forget to put my twine in. Let me do that now before I forget. Pop my twine into my planting hole. Plant it slightly sideways and cover up. Gently press down, very gently. And then I'm gonna wind my twine up my tomato stalk. And you could now at this point go ahead and pinch off any blooms, because it is nice for the plant to be able to focus on root development, at least for the first week or so, instead of worrying about fruit production. It's optional though, you definitely don't have to do that, but I'm gonna go ahead and pinch them off for now. And then just to help with moisture, I'm gonna go ahead and recover a little bit with some of this mulch. Next week we're going to be talking about peony harvest, and also we're going to be going over, next week we're going to be talking about how we time things in our garden bed so that we have spring producers, summer producers, and even how we start incorporating cover crops. So stay tuned for that video, and we will see you guys soon around here at the farm. And remember, if you like this video, to like, subscribe, and do all the things. It means a lot to us here at the farm, and it really helps us keep going. Thanks guys, we'll see you around here next time at the farm.